Hi, and welcome to Founder Friday. We are here to chat with you today about questions that customers have either emailed or sent on social media to us. So today is going to be a day of Q&A. I'll be asking our customer questions to David, and he'll be sharing the answers. If you have any questions during this live, please feel free to put them in the comments, and we will answer as many as we can during this time together. So David, I'm going to start these are going to be random questions, so we're kind of going to be all over the board a little bit today because there's a lot of different questions that have come in. So we may be talking about deliveries, we may be talking about honey, we were going to be talking about all kinds of things. So the first question that we had come in is around honey, and this is a question that we actually get often. And this question is, when honey crystallizes, how do we soften the honey? And also, what are those kind of waxy kind of coating that's on the top of some of the honey that's a little bit different color and doesn't really look like it's the honey itself? We get that question. Or what's the hard stuff on top is the question that comes in. So if you could answer that for us.
Okay, well, to soften honey, it just needs to warm up. So any raw honey, and that's one way you can tell that honey is completely raw, is that it does crystallize. So truly raw honey crystallizes. Now, there are a couple of weird varieties that don't very well, but the stuff that Azure carries does. And it just needs to soften up by heating it. 100 degrees or above softens it right up. So depending on where you live, if you're down south and you can put it in a warm spot on a warm day out on the sidewalk, it'll do the trick. If you're up north and you have a little space heater, in our house in the wintertime, sometimes we have a furnace that we set it on, which works really well because it's like the heat vent of where the heat comes up. In the winter you set it on that. You can put it in warm water. Anything to get it over. Honey melts best above 100 degrees. You don't want her to get it over about 115 or you start compromising the raw qualities of it. So as far as the stuff on top, now we brought up a little bucket here of honey. This is a partial bucket of raspberry blossom honey. It's the bottom of the barrel, so it's going to have the most, but it's not sugared. I didn't have any sugared honey here or crystallized. But this stuff right here is little pieces of wax mixed with propolis. We call it the scum of the honey. And at our house, this is the gourmet. In fact, we often skim it off of barrels, take it home and use this. This is the very best. It's little bits of honey mixed with wax and propolis. Also, when there's a tradition with beekeepers that beekeepers tend to eat this part of the honey. And beekeepers, as a profession, is the oldest lived profession of any profession in the world. Beekeepers, on average, live longer than any other if you separate it out by profession. Many people attribute it to the eating of the propolis and the little pieces of wax. Now, you do have to watch. Occasionally, you might see a little broken bee's leg in that as well. Our honey is not filtered. It has to get too hot to go through a filter to get all of that out, a fine filter. It can no longer truly be called raw. And so that's one of the, shall we say, the trade-offs that we have. For truly raw honey, you're going to get a little bit of the propolis and wax on top. It typically always floats, so if you don't want it, just skim it off. It's perfectly fine, but it's perfectly healthy as well. So as you, whatever you want to do with that. But
Now, if that gets hard, just like when the honey crystallizes and it has kind of a different I've heard customers say like a waxy or a really kind of gray, in their opinion, look compared to the color of the honey. If that gets hard, do you melt it in the same way that you do the crystallized honey? How does that work?
Yeah, well, that's just this scum that's on top, and the honey underneath it's crystallized, so it's not as easy to see. It doesn't float around like this does on liquid honey.
It's interesting that they call that the beekeepers call the best part of the honey on top scum.
So we have a question: what to use to treat the hives for fungus and mites, pesticides or essential oils?
Well, on our farm, we use essential oils. All of our organic honey growers do as well. On the conventional honey, I can't always guarantee what is being used. One of the reasons we have organic honey. I feel like it's fairly benign, as far as herbicides and, as far as pesticides goes, rather. Bees, the fungicide that is used in beehives is not that harsh compared to what you see on other crops. But, hey, I always go for organic if you can. And here on the farm, very little of the honey, none of the honey that we sell is raised here on the farm. We only have 20 hives or so, and that is all. It all goes to our own use and local and that. But we do have some great growers. Our organic clover honey raised by a Canadian farmer, and he is really good. He has a really good program.
So asking that before we, I know that sounds like we might have another question, but one of the questions that I know that our team gets from time to time is, does it really make a difference as far as how do you have bees who are organic? How do bees, how do you control them and prevent them from going to non-organic flowers? Because bees kind of they fly wherever they fly. So what does that look like? So we do get that question.
It's one of the hardest questions in the whole organic program. So the rules have gone down to the bees have to be where the beehive is sitting in a circle. You draw a circle around that. It has to be at least 1 mile from any conventional ground of any sort. Everything has to be organic within a 1 mile radius. Now bees will go a little bit further than that, but not very frequently, unless they're really starving.
So if you get some rogue or overachiever bee, he might go a little further.
Well, if for some reason the flowers that are right within a mile of the hive, but it slows them way down. They can't make much honey if they're flying more than a mile each way for each trip to the hive.
Okay.
So it slows them down so much, they really can't make much honey if they're flying that far. So that is the program. And truthfully, there is no organic honey produced in the USA because there is no place, even on our farm here, and we have a pretty big organic farm, we can't quite set the beehive in the middle of the farm and draw a circle around it and not hit the edge of our certified organic farm. Almost, but we can't quite do it. So there isn't any produced. The organic honey, this is actually not, this is raspberry, but the organic honey that we do get, the clover is from Canada, and the wildflower is actually from the tropical rainforest of Brazil. So
now the non-organic honey, like this raspberry blossom honey, do you have any concerns about, there being any issue with, like you said, herbicides or anything like that with those honeys, or with that? What would you recommend to people if they were concerned about?
I always recommend organic, but the concern of conventional honey having herbicides, pesticides, and stuff in it is relatively small because bees are extremely sensitive. They're very sensitive to herbicide, pesticide residue. It kills them. So beekeepers have to be very careful to keep their bees away from that stuff or it'll kill the hives. A few years ago, there was a huge amount of die-off of beehives, and they called it sudden hive collapse syndrome, I believe. And it was in the news and all that, and it turns out that that's exactly what it was. The bees were just dying from being in areas that had residues of herbicides particularly.
Wow.
So
Well, that's sad. That's sad because bees are so important.
So
to
bees
our
are very
ecosystem,
important,
yeah.
but on the other hand, that does not guarantee, but it makes it much more likely that the honey is going to be pretty clean, even from conventional hives.
Okay, so I'm gonna add down.
So the customer mentions that honey leaches plastic. Would you consider storing honey in glass?
We do have glass choices of honey right now. We have a 32 ounce and a 64 ounce in glass on the organic honey. I feel like honey doesn't, so we do have that. I haven't thought of it being that big of a problem in plastic because it is raw. It does sugar up really quickly. There's not a lot of time for that to happen. But, you know, if someone feels better or you're sensitive to plastics, we do have those options.
Now let's shift a little bit, not just from honey, even though this question happens with honey as well as other products. And I'm going to surprise you with this one because it's a one that I didn't write down, but I actually just saw not that long ago from a customer, which is, let's talk about food, best by dates, expiration, you know, receiving food that says used by, all those different terms. In this society, my understanding is, from my research and just talking to customers through the years, that food doesn't really expire. It goes bad, but those dates we put on things are more marketing related. Could you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's 100% correct. Those dates are not on food for food safety purposes. They're on food for marketing purposes and for rotation purposes. And there's no real law or anything like that, or regulation, or even suggestion of how long to put on a particular product. As a manufacturer, you make that choice because you don't want your food to be subpar. And if you have a perishable item like, you know, cottage cheese or yogurt or something like that, you want to put plenty short enough date on that so that you know, it's going to be top quality still when the customer gets it, or as long as it's within that date frame. Now when you get longer things, and we were just talking about honey, you know, our system it requires an expiration date on everything. Honey will keep literally forever. There was a pot of honey found in the pyramids over 5,000 years old, was perfectly fine. There was absolutely nothing wrong with it. 5,000 years later, and it stays in that very perfect shape once it's sugared. As long as it's sugared, it's really stable, unless, you know, ants or something get into it and eats it like a pest. But as far as it keeping itself, but we just arbitrarily put 5 years on it just because there has to be something to fill in that blank. A lot of other things never expire. I mean, grains. You know, there was wheat found in a pyramid as well. Not quite as old as the honey, but quite old, over 1,000 years. And it still grew. It was completely viable. So stored correctly, those things will keep for a very, very long time. So the dates that are put on many of those long-term things are just purely arbitrary. You know, however, it does help to rotate stock. I always recommend rotating stock, keeping things as new as you can. No, you don't need, use your common sense when it comes to throwing away food that's old and gone bad. Hey, if it's yogurt and it's 3 weeks past expiration, you might want to take a close look at it. Probably not a good idea, you know, to use that. It might be going bad, but it might not. I mean, I've got family members that take old stuff home, and, you know, just by smelling it and sampling it, they can tell. You know, it's pretty easy to tell if it's still good or if it's not good. So yes, the dates are marketing. They're arbitrary. You know, and I'm not saying not to completely don't pay attention to them at all, but they are nothing hard and fast. Use your senses, use common sense, use your taste, use your eyes. That's how to really tell.
And I was grateful to learn that when I came here to Azure, because I was very naive in that. I thought, oh, it's expired, it says it's expired, or it says it's past the best by, so I throw it out. And it was so much food waste. I was wasting so much good food. So I'm like your family members who do that. I've adopted the sniff and taste method of seeing, is it still good? And sometimes things, get a little stale. But because, again, right, when it's going to be at its peak or its best quality, it kind of can degrade.
Yeah, absolutely. Not everything, anything with oils in it will eventually go bad. Corn chips, potato chips, obviously any perishable items, cheeses, yogurts, things like that. I mean, the cheese isn't going to go bad. It's just going to get a little sharper, or it may grow a little mold on it. Mold on the outside of cheese can be totally cut off. There's nothing really dangerous about it. It doesn't seep in through the cheese. Now that is for hard cheese. Now that's not true with cottage cheese. If mold's on cottage cheese, throw it out. You don't want to touch that. But for hard cheese, you can just totally cut that off. A lot of people are asking, how do I keep a little extra food in the house right now? And that is something, you don't need to worry about those things all that much. It'll keep a lot longer than you think often. But these, grains and nuts with oils like pecans, you got to keep those cool. Keep them, store them in a fridge or a freezer or something. Pecans, macadamias, even walnuts. Almonds are a little tougher. Hazelnuts are pretty tender as well. You want to keep those cool, either a cooler or a freezer if you're going to keep them for any length of time. You can keep them frozen for years, but those oils will eventually go rancid in warm temperatures.
Wonderful, thank you. So we're going to switch, still food related, but there was a question about the apple harvest, and right now I believe we're still working off apples from our last harvest that are in cold storage. Is that correct?
Well, Azure doesn't have any apples that we grew here anymore.
Okay.
They've been gone for months.
Okay. So the question has been that this customer has noticed that apples had been just a little smaller in size than in the past. Is there something that happened or that we've seen that's caused that for the last crop?
Not necessarily. Apples size is varietal. So for instance, a Jonagold is typically a quite large apple. A Gala is a really small apple. Fuji's are a little bit on the smaller side too, but you can get a little bit bigger one. The other factor that plays into that is the set of the crop. Now apples, any variety that has any Golden Delicious gene in it, including the Galas, and any golden type tree, that includes the Jonagold, the Gala, the Golden Delicious, a lot of all those varieties, they have a real strong tendency to do something called alternate bear. So what happens is they'll bear really heavy one year and really light the next year. And you try to get that, it's very hard to prevent. I mean, you can, by thinning really heavy, by fertilizing heavy on the off year, you can prevent it a little bit, but it still happens. So on the heavy year, the tree will set a lot of extra fruit. And when it sets that much extra fruit, it doesn't have enough, it's sharing the sugar and the sap with more apples. So each one gets a little bit less. There's just not enough Cambrian under the bark, because all the nutrients for a tree, it goes in the Cambrian. It's the inner layer of the bark. That's where all the nutrients flow up to the apples. And if the tree, especially if the tree's still a little smaller, there's not enough Cambrian bark layer to get enough nutrients to all the apples as much as it wants. So it rations them amongst the apples. And so the apple, oh, well, I'm still going to create my full potential, so they grow smaller. It's pretty simple that way. So that's the other factor. Is if you have what's called an on year, they do those golden related trees. They do on year, off year. So the on year, it makes a little bit smaller apple. And here on Azure Farm, we have our different orchards are actually alternate. So the on year for one orchard is the off year for the other, and the off year for the one's the on year for the other. So with those varietals, we typically have about the same amount every year, but they're from different orchards. So,
well, sometimes when I go in the grocery store, I see these just monster apples that are in there, and on the conventional side, is there a difference in size based on whether it's conventional or organic, or does that not really matter?
No, it's varietal is the biggest thing. What the variety is. Honeycrisp tend to be pretty large. Like I say, Jonagolds are really large. There's some other, there are other varietals. I actually have a friend that has an orchard in Hood River area. He's conventional, but he's very specialized. So his whole job, his whole orchard, he does that. He grows those big apples. And the way he does it is he thins really heavy. So it's only one apple per major branch. So he's taking a lot of the fruit off when it's really tiny. And then he actually even puts a sock, kind of a little paper sock, over the top of each apple to protect it from the sun and stuff, so it's a lot of work, but he gets these really huge apples. They're for specialty markets, for Christmas gifts and stuff like that.
Wow.
And he gets top dollar for it, and it's worth it. But no, it's not anything about conventional and organic. It's about how you thin the trees, and it's also about how you care for that apple once it's set. So those are the major factors, and using a large varietal. Whatever the cultivar is, making sure it's a really large one.
Wonderful. Well, that did sound like a lot of work that your friend does. I was thinking, that is a lot of work for a big apple. I'm going to skip around a little bit just to kind of stay in the food area. Now, I know that right before you came over here, you were over at the greenhouses, and I know you love being over at the greenhouses at this time of the year. And so this next question comes around the greenhouses. We've had a lot of customers that time of the year. We've got the plant starts, and they're available now to get ready for your gardens. And so questions have been coming in on what are on the website, all the varieties that are available. Will there be any additional varieties? And then how do they travel? They're coming from these warm greenhouses. They're shipping across the country on colder trucks. Just what can customers do? How do they travel across the country? And then if something seems like the plant looks like it's not super happy when it arrives, what do you do about that as well?
All right. Yes, the greenhouses are in full swing. It's really it is a lot of fun, and it's great seeing a lot of beautiful plants go out right now. We did have a little bit of a late start on peppers and tomatoes this year. We had an accident in one of the greenhouses some weeks back, and we ended up freezing some of the little seedlings before we transplanted them, but it was our very first batch. They didn't get heated properly, and we had a really cold night here, unseasonably cold night. That anyway, bad mistake, but it did affect those. So we're running about 3 weeks late. Well, probably about 2 weeks late on tomatoes, and maybe 3 to 4 weeks late on peppers. Peppers grow a little slower than tomatoes. Tomatoes actually grow pretty fast once they get going, but because we lost those very first batches, we stagger plant. Because we're selling plants from the middle of March to the middle of June, all the plants, we want to send them to you in their absolute prime. So they're stagger planted. So it didn't kill everything, it just killed the very first batch. So they will be coming on soon. The next planting will be coming. Few other things, a couple of flowers were affected as well. Maybe a handful of other things. But most of the stuff is available, other than those peppers and tomatoes. And the peppers and tomatoes will be shortly. Hopefully by early April, by the 1st of April, the tomatoes should be there. Maybe a couple weeks later, the peppers. By mid-April, we should have all kinds of peppers. As far as traveling, you know, we've been doing this for a long time, sending the plants in the trucks. You know, I can't say there's never a mishap. I mean, we put up arrows on the boxes and stuff. Sometimes you'll get somebody that still turns a box upside down. Don't ask me how that happens, but occasionally it does. If that does happen, sometimes the plants will get scrunched or some of the dirt will come out. Most of the time it doesn't hurt them from a growing standpoint. You know, just turn them back over, water them up good, put a little extra dirt back in whatever fell out, just shove it back in there, water them. 9 times out of 10 they'll be just fine. But that can happen. Another thing that can happen is that they can get too cold. And, you know, most plants, you know, they'll take a little bit below 32, but not much, depending on what it is. But the frost-sensitive plants, 32 is about where it is. Sometimes, you know, occasionally we'll get a driver that accidentally doesn't regulate his reefer quite right. Happens very rarely, but it has been known to happen. If that happens, you'll just see kind of the plant will look like just transparent and flat. That's a freeze kill. If that happens, obviously just call us. We'll be happy to take care of it for you guys. You know, it's on the delivery. On the longer routes, when plants are in the box a long time, you know, it's kind of like, you know, if you put a mat over your lawn grass, eventually it will turn yellow. So they will pale out a little bit. Now, being in cold in the reefer trucks, it does slow their metabolism way down. So they don't turn yellow nearly as fast. So they will stay green for a long time. But some of the routes are out from the time, you know, the plants are pulled till it gets delivered. It can be up to 10 days. Not very often, but that's kind of the longest case scenario. And by the way, we don't pull the plants until the truck is ready to leave. We pull the plants each day based on what trucks are going out within the next 24 hours. So if you're on a route and it's, you know, your order doesn't deliver till towards the end of the week, probably that wasn't pulled until Sunday or Monday or Tuesday of that same week. So just because between the time you place your order and the time you get your order is a long time, doesn't mean that the starts were in the box that long. Just for clarification there. We do that very religiously to make sure that they're as fresh as possible. But after all, they've been in a box, they haven't been exposed to sunlight for a while. Before you just throw them into full sun out in the garden, if you can, leave them for a day or two in a semi-shady spot. You know, open the box up or take the plants out of the box. Put them on your porch. If the weather's right, put them in your house is fine, in a light of place as possible. Just that we call that hardening off, and it just gives them a little bit of time to acclimatize, and that really is good for any plant, you know, no matter where it comes from. Even if you're taking it from a local greenhouse, hardening it off a little bit is a good idea. It increases the growth time, or reduces what we call transplant shock. So sometimes transplant shock, if it's bad, the plant might sit there for a week or 10 days even before it really starts taking off. That, you know, you want to minimize that. We want, you know, when these plants come in, and that's one of the reasons we typically send your plants a little bit smaller than a lot of times you get at a major greenhouse, because it minimizes the transplant shock and it actually catches up. If the plant's too big and it's root bound, the transplant shock is much greater than if it's a little smaller, and the little smaller plant will actually overtake the one that was root bound and went through transplant shock. So by reducing that, I mean, here on the farm, when we transplant stuff, of course it doesn't go in a box, but we almost have none. If you do it right, you can almost eliminate transplant shock completely. It'll just, 2 days after the transplanting, you already start seeing major growth coming from your seedling. And that can be weather related too. If you get a really cold, nasty spell right after you put them in the ground, it's going to take a little longer for them to get going.
Well, that's excellent. I just learned something new for when I'm planting my garden this year. I had no idea. I'm sure that I now understand why some of the things in my garden that have been happening have happened. Well, so thank you for that information. I have learned as well, folks. Staying on the topic of gardening, we had another question from a customer that said, I'm looking for an organic way to prevent weeds in my home garden plot. Can you help?
Prevent weeds. Weeds are the bane of every farmer, whether organic or conventional. There's a bunch of stuff you can do. Obviously, in an organic operation or an organic garden or whatever you're not going to spray anything on weeds. Now, there is one thing that does work that is organic, and I'll tell you about it, not saying I necessarily recommend it, but it is just plain old apple cider vinegar. You can spray apple cider vinegar on your weeds and it will burn them off. It's not like Roundup or anything like that. It doesn't have residual effect or anything like that. It is acidic. It does slightly change the pH of your soil. Now, if you have a little bit of an alkalized soil, that is perfectly fine. I wouldn't be very hesitant to do that. If you would have an acidic soil, be very careful with that. So that is one thing that does work. The white organic distilled white vinegar also works for that. So anyway, now better methods. Obviously, traditional methods is cultivation. I mean, use a hoe, use a wheel hoe. Wheel hoes work really well. Horseshoe hoes, we use those on the farm all the time. Just a hoe that goes over, like horseshoe for smaller weeds. If the weeds get really big, you want what we call a chopper hoe, but the flat hoe. But the horseshoe hoe works really well when the weeds are a little smaller, because you can go both ways. So you can stroke forwards and backwards and kill the weeds both directions, and it goes really, really fast. So that's manual cultivation. A wheel hoe is just on a wheel with kind of like a horseshoe thing. You just push it down your rows and it just cuts everything just under the crown. Most weeds, with a couple of perennial exceptions like morning glory and Canadian thistles, most weeds, as long as you get them cut off under the crown, they're done. That's it. They don't come back. There's a couple things like morning glory or field bindweed, Canadian thistle, quackgrass or crabgrass that are rhizomes, and you cut them off. It sets them back, and if you cut them off enough, it'll eventually kill them. But just hoeing doesn't kill them; they will come back. So those are a little different. Another thing that we do often in our garden, if you have the availability of mulch. Now, mulch is a great way to, if you mulch in between the plants, in between the rows or around the plants. Now, there's some things, you can't mulch around the plants, like carrots. You can't mulch around the plants, but you could mulch in between the rows. And in between, or the hills, however you do your plantings. Grass clippings works really well. Straw. If you do use grass clippings, though, make sure it's from your lawn or somebody that uses organic. If you get it off a lawn that's just had weed and feed on it, the residual from those grass clippings will actually kill the soil, kill the plants. There's actually was a test done with some of that residual those chemicals were actually went through cows, through the manure. The manure was put on a cucumber field, and the cucumbers could not come up because they're broadleaf. That's it's a 2,4-D or Agent Orange based chemical, and that even after it went through the digestive system of a cow and was applied, it was still had strong enough residual effects that it killed cucumber seedlings coming up.
Wow.
So do be careful with that. If it's an organic lawn, make sure there's some dandelions in it if you put grass clippings on your lawn, or from your lawn as mulch on your garden. But large quantities of grass clippings, but they are wonderful mulch. They're really good. Other things you can use if you don't have any organic material, like grass clippings or hay or straw or sawdust or any of those things, those are all fine. They're all organic matter that works really good. Another thing that we have used before, I don't use it typically, but brown cardboard is fine. You can use brown cardboard, lay it down in between the rows, just pin it down or set bricks on it or something like that. It smothers the weeds. Mulch, it's covering the weed. The little seedlings can't come through it. So it works quite well. And then, of course, there's the classic where you use actual plastic mulch. Plastic mulch is fine in an organic system, or we use it sometimes ourselves. But you do have to make sure that if you do use it, you get it all out at the end of the year or during the winter. You don't want that incorporated into your soil. That's very important to keep that out of the soil. But it's fine on top of the soil. It works really good to prevent weeds. But a lot of it, when you're weeds, you're talking sweat equity. And it's just part of organic farming.
Well, I appreciate that information because I just realized I'm doing it wrong. So, so that is very, very helpful. So speaking of, or still in the idea of plants and gardens, we had the weed conversation. What about preventing pests? Any just comments about preventing pests and the best way to do that in a non-toxic manner? I know it's kind of broad.
That actually may be too big a conversation for a part of this. That might be a whole session by itself.
Sounds like we're going to have to do it on another Founder Friday.
I love that topic. It's one of my favorite subjects to talk about, but I'm not sure I can do that one in 5 minutes.
All right, well then we're going to table that, folks, and we will put that one out on another Founder Friday. So be looking for that. It'll be coming up. All right, so let's move to routes. Oh, and if I could do a quick pitch, by the way, for the cardboard, if you're going to do that, and I do line the bottom of my raised beds with cardboard, our drivers, if you're on one of our continuous routes where the truck doesn't come back, often have cardboard that's put on the pallets, and so now is a good time if the driver, ask your driver, hey, do you have any cardboard or pallets? Because those guys have to find a place to dispose of those pallets while they're out. They don't come back, the ones who are on the routes that don't come back to us. So if you have use for pallets, or ask your driver if he has any cardboard for your garden. And it also makes great forts for the kids. I've seen some folks take some of the pallets and the cardboard and let the kids play and make forts and stuff. But right now is a good time to ask them, and it helps the driver out too, because then they're not looking for a place to try to go dispose of those things. And so even the plastic wrap that we put around, if you can just help out, if you could have a use for it, all of that's available when the drivers are breaking down those pallets. So don't hesitate to ask the driver if he has some of that available. That would help them out and help you as well. All right, so I'm going to shift. Speaking of drivers, some of the rest of the questions that we have from customers have kind of been around stock, trucking, schedules, those kinds of things. So one of the questions that came in recently is, can Azure create a wait list to limit the number of new customers so current customers have access to stock first? And I think some of that's coming because of just announcements in our own, nation about shortages and supply and that type of thing.
Well, of course, anything can be done. But in my opinion, that would be one of the most counterproductive things that we could possibly do, because the volume increase really helps us keep things in stock, because the more farmers that we can contract with and that we can take their whole crop, the more crops that we have available to us. If we have to call up a farmer and say, hey, I need a few totes, he's like, I just don't have time to mess with that. If we can call up a farmer and say, hey, we'll take your whole crop, and they go, yeah, that's it. And so every time that we increase volume here at Azure, we're actually increasing our in-stock ratio. Now, the things that hurt our in-stock ratio more are huge spikes and valleys. So the inconsistency, and right now we are dealing with a little bit of a spike on some items, particularly things like wheat. We're getting all the wheat. I mean, we're not really out of wheat. We just can't clean it and bag it fast enough. Our cleaners are running almost 24 hours a day at maximum capacity, keeping the wheat coming in. So we are shorting some wheat, but we will be upgrading our cleaners this summer to get higher volume through those cleaners. But it has been so much easier the past year or so. When I was contracting this past year, it was so much easier to get our product in, to get everything that we need for everybody, because we're able to say, yes, we'll take it. We'll take a full load. We'll take all you got. We'll take 10 loads. We'll take 50 loads, whatever they have. It just makes all the difference in the world. So it would be for us to do that would be completely counterproductive. We would actually be, not only limiting Azure's growth, creating higher prices for everybody else, but we would also not be increasing your chances of having in stocks. So, and I know there's a scarcity mindset sometimes that, hey, if somebody else got it, I didn't get it. But, I feel like, in my experience, it's a world of abundance. Yeah, there is scarcity, don't get me wrong. There are certain things that are in short supply this year, and that puts upward price pressure, which more farmers will plant it next year because it's higher price. That's the free market economy. So there will be some shortages, but for the most part, that is kind of the wrong mindset when we're looking at it. If I get it, no. The right mindset is, let's have enough for everybody. Let's create more. Let's plant more. Let's purchase more. Let's increase our production. And there's many ways that we can do that. And but who's going to increase your production if you don't have a market for it? That's the market versus the production. There's still thousands of acres, hundreds of thousands, probably maybe millions of acres that aren't even being planted. Some of them are still in government programs where the government pays them not to plant. I know the government's been phasing that out the last 5-6 years, but it's, there's still a lot of land that's not. No, it's the food shortages that we have. I mean, some of them are weather and drought related, but it's not, even that would be overcome if everyone was running at full production. But farmers tend to plant what they can sell, us included. I'm not going to plant something, who wants something to plant something that you don't have a ready market for? So the more that Azure can create markets, the more farmers we can get on board. Definitely the easier it is to get the farmers on board, and the manufacturers and so on. It's even if we private label something, the more we do, the more easily it is to get that to happen. Oh, you want to write a contract for 100 cases of that? Are you kidding? You want to write a contract for 100,000 cases? Yeah, we're ready to go. So the more we sell, the better our chances of having in stock is. And there may be little things in the short term, like we can't get enough wheat through the cleaner right now because there's a big spike in wheat. So a few people are going to be shorted. But the long term is wrong philosophy.
All right. Thank you for sharing that. We do want to have plenty for all. You know, it's important. People need to be able to eat. Speaking of the private label that you brought up, and that was another question. I don't have it written down, but I did see come through about why we are at Azure moving more and more products over to private label. And I think there's a sense that maybe private label or the Azure brand is kind of more of a value brand, which it kind of is from our pricing standpoint, because we can keep our price down because of how we're doing that. But it kind of looks like, you know, it's generic as opposed to maybe the quality suffers because it's under an Azure brand, and that was kind of the takeaway from the question that I saw around that. So could you kind of share like why we're moving things into the Azure brands more and more, and what that really will do to benefit our customers, and why we've kind of gone that direction?
Yeah, and actually the vast majority of the Azure brand stuff we do produce ourselves, just to set the record straight on that. Now there are a few things, and we are moving some more things into the Azure brand. You know, for instance, the cleaners, we don't actually make them here in-house. We have somebody else make those for us. They're our formulas, but they're not made in-house. So I'm assuming that those are the kinds of things you're referring to.
Yes.
And when that happens, there's two really good things that happen when we're able to do that. One is we're able to create our own formulas. So I feel like we have the ability to come up with the very best, whether it's cleaners or whether it's, you know, cake mix or seasonings or whatever it is. I feel like, and we have a really robust team here at Azure that's really good at making some of that kind of stuff. And we are really fussy about our ingredients. Hey, so many of the branded products, the ingredients are, you know, they're okay, but they put stuff in there they really don't need to put in there. I want to be as pure as we really can. Oh, do we really need, you know, potassium ascorbate in that? Well, potassium ascorbate is really not that bad, but, you know, if you need, shouldn't, you know, if we can get away from using it as a preservative, that's not really where it shines. So we can control the ingredients and the quality. It can be our formulas, and typically we're able to decrease the price a little bit because we're doing the contracting on that. So there's not a, if you look at a branded product, there's several pieces that have to happen. So most branded goods are private label made as well. So let's say we'll take the Natural Value just off the top of our heads. They don't make anything at Natural Value. It's 100% private label from other companies. But they have to take it, they have to get it made, do their labeling. Somebody, you know, the Natural Value company needs to make a profit. Then it needs to go to a third-party warehouse. It needs to be stored someplace while it's waiting for somebody to buy it, like us. So then you're paying a warehousing fee. You know, paying it is part of the cost of the product. And then you're picking it up a little at a time. So then you have the freight and stuff on top of that. And sometimes the warehouse may be the wrong direction from where it's manufactured. I mean, you may have freight either way. But if we're able to do a private label directly from the manufacturer, directly to us, then we're cutting out at least 2 of the middlemen. So now we don't have anybody that's the brand holder that's doing the advertising and stuff. We don't have to pay for the national advertising, and we don't have to pay for the graphic designers and those people's profit, or you don't have to pay, really, it's whoever's buying it. And we don't have to pay for a third-party warehouse, and maybe for the product to be shipped the wrong direction to get to that third-party warehouse. So you're cutting 2 pieces of the cost stream and the inefficiency, including carbon footprint. You're cutting a fair amount of that out by going to a direct private label. And so we're able to get you a better quality product at a better price. And that's the whole goal. Hey, that's a big part of the Azure mission right there. We want to get families bulk and healthy food at an affordable price. And by going to our Azure brands, I can't say that it's a perfect solution, but it's definitely a big step in the right direction.
Excellent. So I'm going to shift a little bit to just our order process, and we often have a lot of questions around that. So one of the questions is, why can't orders be locked into place? I'm a member of another co-op, which there's a little bit of confusion there, and they lock orders in. So if you could speak to that.
Okay, so I'm assuming what they mean by that is that if an order is placed, that we allocate stock for it.
That's what I believe. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Which, yes, that could be done, but there's 2 things. It's a trade-off that we have. There's 2 things that would have to happen. One is we would have to limit how early somebody could order product, and number 2, we would also have to limit the ability to edit an order after the fact. So, for instance, if an order were to be placed 3 weeks before the cutoff, and you had cottage cheese or yogurt or something on that order, if we allocated the stock right then at that time, they would be getting outdated rotten yogurt, because hanging on to that yogurt for that length of time by allocating that just purely doesn't work. And you fill in the blanks. It's a large percentage of the stuff here at Azure. Yogurts and cheeses, produce, all those kinds of things, not to mention things like starts. Not a good plan. Those would be seriously overgrown. So we couldn't do it that way. So the only way that would work is if we allocated it, say, the last 2 days. Now, that's still a bit of a problem, because for one thing, we have, at the point you're placing your order, we don't necessarily know what order the orders are going to be picked in. We have to put that in order later. So product that's the stock is close on, we try to allocate the best we can. But when the picking order is there, another thing, it would actually create more out of stocks, because if we were holding this stock and we hold it past the time the new stock comes in, then not only is somebody getting older stock when they could have been getting new stock, but we didn't sell stock to somebody else because we were holding that stock for an order that wasn't even shipped yet. So, and then if you allocated stock and then somebody canceled their order at the last minute, then we would be sitting on rotten stuff that's now going to go bad because it was allocated. So we'd have to lock in the order so that you couldn't change it. So it's a trade-off in that sense. Yes, we could, but is it a good idea? And right now, I'm going to say, in my opinion, the answer is no. It's not a good idea. I think it's better. We want to try to have as much stock as we possibly can. I think we've gotten a lot better at that over the course of the last couple years, particularly. But I think it's better to allow our customers to order when they want to order, create their shopping lists, place their order, keep adding to it, use it as, you can put it on your phone or on your computer or whatever, and just anytime you run out of something, you see it's getting low in the pantry, just keep adding to it. I think that's a really important aspect. Or if you find that extra bag that you didn't remember that you had, that you can delete it off. Oh, I guess I don't need another bucket of coconut oil. I got a whole big bucket over here that I forgot about. Oh, delete that off. We couldn't allow that if we were allocating stock. So that's the main reason.
So speaking of, you mentioned the word picking order, and I know that's internal language that we use here at Azure. So if you could share with our customers kind of what that means. So when what is picking order and how are the trucks loaded? I know one of the questions that comes in, or just kind of comments sometimes that come in, is people at the beginning of the route or beginning of the week who are on those routes early, will they get access to more stock than those who are at the end of the week or who are at the end of the routes? And so I think having a little clarification, kind of how that works, would be really helpful.
Okay. So that's not true. We get product in every single day. There are no days that we have no product coming in, including weekends. And we also pull orders every day, lately even including weekends. Sometimes we can take a Sunday off, but not very often. We're pulling orders almost 24/7. We run 2 shifts at the warehouse, and we typically stagger days off and run 7 days a week. So we're both receiving product and picking product around the clock, 7 days a week. And so it's going in and out at the same rate. So that has no bearing whatsoever on whether something's in stock. Now I will say, in all fairness, on certain perishable items, for instance, Nancy's yogurt, we always get that in on a Tuesday afternoon. So if your order typically is always picked on a Tuesday, if we're running short of Nancy's yogurt at all, you're going to be the one that's going to be most likely out of stock. Just, in certain routes we do typically pick on a Tuesday. The C route, for instance, is a Tuesday pick. Typically, although lately if we have 2 trucks, it could end up being a Wednesday pick as well for the second half of the truck. So that part has no bearing. I will explain just a little bit lately, and maybe I'll use this map. I don't know if you can quite see it from there or not, but let's just take, so each one of these represents one route. So this is oak here, it's red, so maybe you can see it a little better to use as an example. So on the oak trip that's out right now, we ended up having 5 trucks, and we have 2 drivers making those deliveries. So, one truck starts here, and then the other's truck will start somewhere here in the middle. So on Monday morning, we'll get, and actually I think this one was up a little further because we cut a little bit off of chard here and put on to oak. So he'll start here on Monday morning and throughout the week. But since it's 5 trucks, this guy is going to go from here to here, and then another truck's going to meet him, and they're going to refill him, and then he's going to go from here to here. So this will probably be like Tuesday, and this might be Thursday morning for him to get his 3rd truck. The other guy started over here, and he only had 2 trucks, so he maybe is delivering, Monday, Tuesday. He might get another truck on Wednesday and do Wednesday, Thursday, Friday with the 2nd truck. Now, pick those just in time to ship. It takes roughly 2.5 days to get from here, our warehouse, out to Oak. So the first shipment here, that's going to leave here probably on a Friday to get, so we can transload it like Sunday evening for a Monday morning start. So the first 2 loads will get pulled probably on a Thursday, because I think our cutoff is Wednesday night for Oak. So that would get pulled then on Thursday. The second truck, it might get pulled a day or 2 later. The last truck that doesn't go out till Wednesday, that one we might have pulled Sunday or Monday, and it ships out and gets there on leaves say Monday noon to get there on a Wednesday afternoon to do the last transload for that.
So we have shuttle trucks leaving Oregon,
So the shuttle,
and the shuttle trucks bringing the product to refill our route
the delivery
trucks along the route.
That's
So right, so the truck starts here and he gets here and he's empty. The next shuttle truck's coming and refilling him so he can continue along the route.
That is correct, and that's the way we've been doing this almost from the beginning. Initially, when we first set these up, these were basically 1 truck each, but that hasn't been the case at least for more than 2 years now.
Okay.
So this, these are various number of trucks. We've also had a few questions about the inconsistent delivery times, I believe.
Yes, we have.
And this kind of will tell you how that happens. So this one up here, these guys over here might typically be Monday, but when you're over in here, now is this on truck 1, 2, 3? This is going to be a Friday. So truck 2 is starting 1 drop away from the Friday guy on a Monday. Now, if the truck is a little bit fuller now, and we have to move this truck back a little bit, the drop that got a delivery last time on Friday, say here in Independence, Kansas, might now be the first drop on the truck next month. So that's where you get, so it's those drops that are kind of in the middle of the route that are affected most by the inconsistent delivery times, because it may not be on the same truck. We're trying to optimize the delivery trucks so all of the trucks are full and all the shuttles going out are full. So the other thing that we do is if, for instance, this Oak, after Oak, it goes into Apple here. So let's say Oak had 5 1/4 trucks. It was 10,000 pounds too heavy to get it on those 5 trucks. So then what we will do is we will say, hey, we're going to back out the first 2 drops or 3 drops that would deliver probably on a Friday, and we're going to put them on the beginning of Apple here. So now instead of getting delivery Friday afternoon, you're going to get delivery on Monday morning, or even sometimes these, if they're really full, we may go into deliver Sunday afternoon to finish those out. So now, but your cutoff actually gets backed up till the Apple cutoff, which is probably almost a week later, give or take a day.
So you get a little extra time.
You get a little extra time to modify your order if you so desire. And then we'll start here with the Apple, and so truck 1 will start here. So this guy, who would normally be 8 a.m. Sunday morning, is now maybe noon on Sunday, on Monday, because there's a few other drops he had to deliver first that were leftovers from the Oak route from the time before. So that's how that works. And I'm not saying it's ideal. It's not a perfect world, but it's the best we could come up with when we're dealing with the peaks and the valleys that we're dealing with right now. If every order was consistent and we just saw consistent growth, if everything was all even, then we wouldn't have to do it this way. but that is not what we've been dealing with for the last 2 years. Nothing is even. Availability of product is not even. The orders coming out are not even. And so that is the way we've been dealing with these spikes and valleys that we've been dealing with for the past 2 years. And still being able to optimize delivery so we can, for the most part, get delivery to everybody on time during the week. And that's also why we can't really give out a schedule that's of any value whatsoever before your cutoff, because we don't know who all ordered and how much weight is in here and where we have to split these trucks. Once we know that, then we can send the schedule of deliveries out and we can stick to it pretty close. But before that happens, it's almost impossible to know. And that's why, years ago we used to do that. We used to send out schedules before the deliveries happened. But the last few years, that's been completely impossible. And I apologize for that. I know sometimes people may not place an order if they knew it was actually going to be on a Wednesday afternoon or whatever. But unfortunately, we just, someday we may figure it out, but I have no way of figuring that out right now until we actually lock in what's done.
Yeah.
So.
Well, which I understand, because if two of these drops don't order for a month, that changes the dynamics of how we're delivering on the route. Would that be correct statement?
That is correct too, but if this drop up here orders an extra couple thousand pounds, it also pulls the split of the next truck back because there's more weight on this truck. So we can't get the next drop on it, and we have to put the next drop on the next truck.
So there's a lot of dynamics that impact how delivery happens with the trucks.
There is, absolutely.
The truck could be overweight, and need to be added onto another truck, which changes. It could be.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
you can't just throw extra things on a truck. Department of Transportation, not that it would be safe to do that anyway, but the Department of Transportation doesn't allow that. They have a cutoff, and they give you big fat tickets if you go over a certain weight limit. So none of the drivers, they don't want to take out overweight loads. We have to keep it, but we want to maximize it right to the legal limit, which is what the trucks are actually built for, because we're saving fuel and equipment and drive time by maximizing and doing the maximum load that equipment is actually built to do. So typically, a truck holds roughly 40,000 pounds of product. Gross legal weight on a truck is 80,000 pounds. Typically, there's certain setups that are different, but most of them 80,000 pounds. Truck and trailer, all that, set up the way that we have them with the reefers and everything else, weighs real close to 40,000 pounds empty. So the payload is about 40,000 pounds is what a truck can haul. So when we do that, we have to split these up into roughly 40,000 pound increments. Just, for easy numbers. It's slightly different than that on different configurations, but pretty close.
And I imagine we want to maximize that load for multiple reasons, but also because if we have half a truck going out, then that's not cost effective for us to send half a load across the country.
Well, it's not cost effective, and it's not a good carbon footprint, and it's not, it's wasting resources, money, fuel, all those things that,
So that really goes against our sustainability.
It goes against the sustainability commitment, not to mention the extra cost that has to get added on to the product.
So that answered a couple of the questions that were on the list already, so that was very helpful. So let me just take a look here to see if there were any other questions. There is one more question that is about prices. We shared with everyone in a recent video that because of what is the pricing pressures and what's happening in the marketplace, that we did need to do an increase, and we did keep it as small as we could. However, we have talked a little bit about our warehouse expansion, and so one of the questions that kind of came up was, is part of the price increase to fund the warehouse expansion? Are we using any of that for that?
No, that was definitely not the intent. We're hoping to fund the warehouse through a program very similar to the CSI program that we used some years ago to fund inventory. We're hoping to call it the CSW program, and I don't really have it completely vetted all the way out yet. But we're hoping to have folks, customers, folks that are interested in Azure, help to fund that. Actually buy some square feet of that, and Azure can rent that back. That's the goal for funding the warehouse. I hate price increases. It's horrible, and there's been upward pressure on product anyway, and we did have to increase some things. We had to do a cost increase. I guess I would call that a margin increase. It's the first one we've ever done in years, but that's completely based on trucking and freight and fuel. The cost of trucking has more than tripled in the past 2 years. To get, obviously fuel is a big factor in that, but there is a driver shortage, and there is also a little bit of a truck shortage because of the parts. If a truck breaks down, often they can't get parts to fix the truck. So it's left less trucks on the road for the amount of freight that's out there. And so freight has become more and more expensive. And so basically the cost increase that we did, the margin increase I should say, it was very small, but that was just barely enough to cover the increased cost of freight and fuel. So if we're running our own trucks, there's a little bit of a shortage on getting trucks, and there's also a tight, drivers are in short supply. So obviously they're being paid more than they used to be. As the supply and demand, so it's a good career to get into right now. But that is completely what that was intended to cover, and I do promise if that goes away, that those margins will be readjusted. That's an Azure guarantee. We will always do that. We always run on a cost plus basis. That's our policy. We do it always. And unfortunately the plus was caused just by inflationary pressure, but particularly in the freight and fuel category, which is basically the biggest cost here at Azure, other than all of our the people.
Now there are some specific products that have gone up in price. We've had to do a little price increase on our side, but some of our vendor branded or some of our other products have come in with kind of some significant price increases. Can you speak to that a little bit? Because we've had some customers asking about why, yes, that there's been, a need for a price increase because of what's happening in the market, but then some of the things that have just kind of gone up exponentially. Can you just kind of share a little bit about that?
Well, we're talking about, when we look at things, the organic food market is still, for the most part, a free market economy. So, it's based on the agreement that you get between a seller and a buyer. So many of the farmers, and I'm not just talking about farmers only, but we'll just take that for an example. A good farmer, he's going to try to get as much for his crop as he possibly can. So some of the farmers, they decided to sell right at harvest time, or maybe they don't have storage space or whatever. So right at harvest time, they realize they're not going to get quite as much for it, most likely. but it is always a gamble. Maybe they will. If there's an abundance of the product throughout the season, it doesn't typically go up in price as the season progresses. Then there's other farmers that say, and back in the day when we did commodities grain, we did this. We would hold on a little bit. We don't do that anymore, but we did years ago. And we would hold on to our grain and sell it later in the season. Because generally speaking, if there's a little bit of a shortage in the market, then the price goes up because the people that need to buy grain, that's us now, you're looking for grain, and the people who needed to sell right away, their bins are empty. So now you're looking for somebody that still has grain in their bins. And this is any commodity. I'm just using grain as an example. It can be anything. But they still have, grain, oats, whatever, in the bin. So, but they say, hey, you want to buy my oats? Hey, I held on to it, so I want more. And so you come to an agreement. Yeah, we'll pay you a little more. So you pay a little more. And then the next guy, maybe, so as the season progresses, very frequently you see this happen when we're in a tight market. Now, if everybody still had a lot of grain in the bins and they were having trouble getting it sold, then the price would not go up. It might even come down a little bit. Oh, I need to clean out my bins. I need to get rid of it. We'll take any price. But this year is not one of those years. With the drought that happened last summer, with the crisis in the Ukraine that's putting extra market pressure on, on the worldwide supply, as well as having shortages in Europe and other parts of the world, and not the greatest crop in Australia this year either, we're not looking at a super abundant year from a worldwide grain and food in general supply. So the farmers that still have it left in their bins know that there's not a lot of it still out there. So they're going to say, hey, I usually sell for $12 a bushel. I want 16 now, or I want 20. It can go up that radically. So there's your upward pressure, and it's part of supply and demand, and it's the way the marketplace works. If the supply is heavy, the price goes down. If the supply is light, the price goes up. And I've gone out with a couple of other videos saying, hey, there's going to be upward pressure on prices because the market is short. We had a drought last summer in the US. Not a very good year in Australia. A lot of drought and fires there. Europe had some weather issues as well. China's having some issues of their own. Worldwide, the supply of food was not as large as usual. There was a little bit left from years before. All that kind of balances out, but it's put serious upward pressure on pricing this year. And we're going to see it. Right now, it's still pretty early, but right now, I would say the crops here in the U.S. at least look quite good. Everything's looking really nice. Still, there's still things that could happen between now and harvest. But right now it's looking good. Got pretty much the moisture in the Midwest that's to be expected for this time of the year. The jet streams look like they're kind of in the right place. Still a little dry in California, but other than that, looking pretty good. But, it's only March, and, depending on the crop, those things harvest anywhere from May to November. So, there's still things that can happen. Europe is not looking very good this year, just for transparency. My understanding is, looking at industry news and market news, they're definitely not looking at a really nice crop set in Europe and North Africa and the Mediterranean, which so we could still see into next year some of the things that are heavy from those areas, like the olive oils and things like that, we could still be seeing upward pressure on. going into next year. It's, but again, like I say, it's way too early to really make that prediction. But right now, that's a marketplace status. Here in the industry, we kind of look at these things on a regular basis, and that's the way it's looking right now.
Thank you so much for answering that. Just checking to see if we have any other questions. No, not at this time. All right, well, David, thank you for answering these questions. I just want to share with everyone that a couple things. One is, if you enjoy this kind of Q&A where we just kind of talk about random topics, please just share in the comments that you want to see us do more of these Q&As, if you'd like that. If you have additional questions that come up as you're watching the video later, if you go back and watch anything, or you just think of a question, please feel free to put it in the comment section, and we'll be checking that. We do our Founder Friday once a month, but we also come out with other videos at other times. So also, I just want to encourage you, if you do have other questions for a future Q&A that we'll be doing, feel free to email those into us at info@azurestandard.com and just put Founder Friday question, and we'll have the team get those to us so that we can go ahead and put those on our next series of Q&As so that we can do this again for you. So thank you very much for joining us. We greatly appreciate you, and we hope you have a blessed weekend.
Thank you.